Hey there, if you are a new health coach who is just getting started, you're going to want to hear the top 5 mistakes that I hear new health coaches making that keep them feeling stuck and frustrated and like frauds and imposters. So not only today am I going to share what those top 5 mistakes are, I'm going to tell you what to do instead. So please stay tuned for all these top 5 mistakes, because if you do what I share, I know that you're going to start to feel more like a skilled and confident health coach. So the first mistake that I want to share with you is that I see a lot of new health coaches not coaching during the discovery call. And so what do I mean by that? Well, I've heard a lot of new coaches who say we shouldn't coach, or we were taught not to coach during an initial call, a discovery call. And what they really mean by that is that they think coaching is giving recommendations. So first thing I want to say is that coaching is not giving recommendations. So let's clear that one up right away. And that 100% absolutely you should coach during that initial discovery call, because you want to give your client a taste of what coaching is all about. That's what you're there to do. So what I've seen is that I think a lot of health coach training programs teach that first initial call should be a health history or like a health intake. It's very medically focused. You're asking your client, to share things about symptoms, medications, illnesses. And what I feel this does, it really sets the coach up for failure because we are not trained as medical doctors, right? We are not supposed to diagnose, prescribe, or treat. And if you talk all about this medical stuff on that initial call, then I think your client is going to think that you're going to do that, right? And that is not our role. So what I recommend you do instead is not to pretend to be a doctor or a medical expert, not to ask those types of questions, and to really demonstrate coaching, right? What does that look like? So I recommend that you do more of a discovery call versus a medical intake or a health history. And the discovery call from a coaching perspective would be all about getting to know your client. Are they a good fit? What are their challenges and obstacles? And what are their health and wellness goals? So I like to use the model of what's your current state, what's your future state, and then how are you going to get there? And the how are you going to get there in the discovery call from a coaching perspective would be you're going to work with me as your coach to help you get there. So I really feel like if you start off with this discovery call from a coaching perspective and demonstrate straight coaching and what it's going to be like to be coached with you, you're going to set your coaching relationship off on the right start. So your client is going to know what they can expect from you as a coach and not a medical expert. And then you're going to feel so much more relieved. You're going to release all that pressure to have to know it all and fix all of their health conditions because you're not setting yourself up as a medical expert. So mistake number 2 that I see a lot of new health coaches making is that they don't do foundation sessions. So I see a lot of times on that first session, once the client has hired you and you've decided to work together, on that first session, it's kind of a continuation of that health history or medical intake where the coach is, hearing more about symptoms and illnesses and conditions, and then trying to come up with solutions and trying to fix those. So we talked about, why that's not great during the discovery session. And what the coach is doing then on that first session is just giving a bunch of recommendations. And what they're doing is they're jumping into the action stage of change. So if you're familiar with the stages of change, you'll know that action is sort of partway down the list. There's a few steps before that. So we need to start with the client at the beginning. So it's not great to give a bunch of recommendations and try to fix and solve during that first session because no foundation has been set. Your client isn't really primed yet for the coaching relationship. You haven't gotten a chance to really establish and find out their readiness for change. And if your client is still in contemplation or just thinking about making some of these health and wellness changes, you're going to be setting them up for failure because you're going to be giving them action steps right away that they're not ready for. So this could possibly have your client be feeling very overwhelmed, and then you're maybe going to feel like a failure because your client didn't do those action steps and they didn't get off to a great start. So what I recommend you do instead, and this is what I teach in my Health Coaching Essentials course, is to start with some foundation sessions. So this could be your first 2 or 3 sessions with your client, and it's really laying the foundation for the coaching process, for the behavioral change process your client is going to go through. And so this is, you're going to start with probably some assessments, right? Maybe some personality assessments, some wellness assessments to gauge your client's baseline. Where are they as you're getting started? You'll probably also, I really recommend doing some visioning work, taking a whole session to focus on the vision and where your client wants to be. Also taking a session to do some values and strengths work so your client knows where they are, right? What are the strengths and values that are going to carry them through the coaching relationship? And then you're going to spend a session on goal setting, helping your client develop some SMART goals. So instead of just jumping in with a bunch of recommendations in that first session, really take those first 2 or 3 sessions to do some deep foundation work to help set your client up for success. So the third mistake I see a lot of new health coaches making is that they don't set an agenda for their coaching sessions. So we've been talking a lot about this week in my Health Coaching Essentials course. And what happens is that a lot of new coaches fall into the chit-chat trap. Boy, that's a tongue twister. So what I mean by that is, you start your session, it's a nice warm welcome, you kind of start chit-chatting, how was your week, what's new and good, what's been going on, and that just becomes the entire session, right? So why this doesn't work so well is that you probably didn't actually get to process some coaching, right? You didn't get to set some action steps with your client. And it feels more like a friendly conversation, so it was probably a good conversation, but it wasn't an effective coaching process. So again, your client might be leaving the session feeling like they didn't really accomplish what they want to accomplish, and you also might be feeling like you really didn't do a great job as a coach. So what I recommend instead is that you absolutely take a few minutes to set the agenda for the coaching session. So yes, do a warm welcome, check in with what's new and good, maybe do some centering and grounding, then do your accountability check-in from the last time, and then take a few minutes to set the agenda. What client do you want to focus on today, right? What do you want to walk away from the session with today? What is the main topic that you want to focus on? So those are going to be some great questions to really bring some clarity and focus to your coaching session. And so this is really going to give you focus. You're going to know what you need to do to help your client to get to that outcome of the session. And you're going to get to do some actual coaching. And of course, your client's going to feel much better at the end too because they got what they needed, right, out of the coaching session. So mistake number 4, what I see a lot of new coaches doing, we sort of touched on this a little bit, is that they give recommendations. So I know that many health coach training programs teach that you should give recommendations at the end of the health coaching session. So the coach gives some recommendations, the client goes away, and that's what they're going to work on in between the session. So why is this a mistake? Well, number 1, it keeps you in the role of expert, right? You're the expert, you're telling the client what to do based on your recommendations. So this is different from the real coaching mindset, which is more about being an ally, a guide, and a partner, right, with your client. And so, when we're trying to show up as the expert, we never really feel qualified in that role because you are not a medical expert. So to give a bunch of health and wellness recommendations and suggestions, keeps you sort of in that role of medical expert. So you're probably going to feel like a fraud and an imposter because you're not trained to be a medical expert, to give protocols and dietary recommendations and those kinds of things. It's also not great for the client because, just telling someone what to do isn't all that empowering. And so from a behavioral change coach perspective, we really want our clients to be empowered. So it's much more empowering for them if they come up with their own ideas, their own suggestions and recommendations, and their own action steps and goals to work on. So much more effective. So what I recommend instead is that you guide the client through an action planning phase. So at the end of your coaching session, once you find out what they want to talk about, you explore and process the coaching, then you move into that action planning phase where you use your high mileage questions to really support the client in coming up with a smart action plan, right? So we don't tell them what to do, but we guide them through a process for them to come up with what's going to work for them. I could never come up with an action plan that's really going to, be tailored and customized to what's going to work for my client, because what works for me or other clients is not going to work for this particular client. So we also have to honor that our clients are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, and they have the answers inside of them. So we're really honoring that as coaches. So it is much more empowering for the client if they come up with the action steps rather than putting all of that responsibility on you. So it takes the responsibility off of you, right? Phew, I don't have to come up with recommendations and tell people what to do, right? I'll just guide them through a process so they can figure that out for themselves. So this leads me to my final mistake today, which is mistake number 5. That a lot of new coaches do take on most of the responsibility for the coaching. They put all of that on themselves, as we just sort of touched on. So as new coaches, I get it. I know that you want to provide value, you want to have the client feel like it's worthwhile working together, that you know what you're talking about. And so what we tend to do is sort of take it all on. We become responsible for most of the coaching relationship. And so we do all the work for our clients, right? We do the research. We find all the resources. We come up with recommendations. We provide recap emails. We check in on our clients in between sessions. And then all the client really has to do is show up to the session. But we know that the magic actually happens when the client is back in their life, implementing their action steps. And so we really do have to be conscious about not doing it all for a client. As I was saying before, it's much more empowering when the client does their own work. When I was going through my ICF accreditation process and I was working with my mentor, he was listening in to my coaching recordings and said to me, "You're doing all the work for your clients," right? And so this was a big learning for me. And I think it's a good one to learn early on, that we want to support our clients and we do everything in our power to do that, but they need to do the work and they need to take responsibility for their own health and well-being. So it's really important for you to switch into that role. So it doesn't work, when we do all the work for our clients, because it doesn't honor the coaching relationship. It doesn't honor that we're both equals and that we have each roles and responsibilities as part of the coaching relationship. And again, it doesn't honor that core principle that our clients are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, and they have the answers inside of them. And when we're doing all the work for our client, it's not empowering for them. We're just telling them what to do and doing all the work, and it's going to be a lot of work for us. So I know when I started doing all of this, I got burnt out, I was stressed out, I was overwhelmed. It was just too much. So what I recommend that you do instead is really get clear on roles and responsibilities in your coaching relationship, outline those in your agreement up front, really let the client do the work. Be okay to say to your client, "Why don't you go away and do that research? What would you like to try? How are you going to hold yourself accountable to this? You know, how about you do a recap email about what you're going to accomplish? So this is going to be so much more empowering for them. They're going to be more apt to be engaged in the coaching process and reach their goals, and it's going to take a heck of a lot of pressure off of you. So those were my 5 mistakes, the top 5 mistakes that I see new health coaches making and what to do instead. I hope those were helpful tips for you. If you have any questions about these, you can always post them in the comments, and I'd love to provide some answers for you. So thanks again for sticking around till the end, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.